I still have 43 unheard voicemails from my father saved on a phone I no longer use because I can't bring myself to delete them, and I can't bring myself to listen to them either. My name is Naomi. I'm 29, and for the last 2 years of my father's life, I was too busy to answer his calls, and now I have all the time in the world to regret that, and none of it can change anything. If this story reaches something in you, stay till the end and consider liking and subscribing. There's more like it here. My father, Samuel, was a quiet man who raised me alone after my mother left when I was 6. He worked as a postal carrier for 28 years, the kind of steady, unremarkable job that let him be home every evening, at every school event, at every small moment that made up an entire childhood. He wasn't a man of big gestures. He showed love through consistency, through always being exactly where he said he'd be. When I moved to Chicago for a marketing job 4 years ago, the calls started slowing down almost immediately. Not because I stopped loving him, but because life simply got loud in the way it does when you're young and building something you think matters more than it actually does. He called every Sunday, without fail, same time, same routine he'd kept since I was a teenager. And slowly, over 2 years, I started letting more and more of those calls go to voicemail. I told myself I was just busy. Deadlines, a demanding boss, a relationship I was trying to make work with someone who eventually left anyway. I told myself I'd call him back later, and later became days, and days became weeks, where the only thing connecting us was a growing list of unheard voicemails I always meant to get to, eventually. He never once complained about it. That's the part that haunts me most now. Every voicemail I did, happened to listen to during those 2 years, was warm, patient, completely without guilt or pressure. Hey, sweetheart, just checking in. No need to call back if you're busy. I know how it is. Love you. Over and over, that same patient warmth, never once making me feel guilty for the growing silence between us, which somehow made the silence feel even worse in retrospect. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, not from my father, but from his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a woman I barely knew, her voice shaking as she explained that my father had collapsed in his driveway while bringing in groceries, that paramedics were currently working on him, that I needed to get to the hospital as quickly as I possibly could. I don't remember booking the flight. I don't remember the drive to the airport. I remember sitting on that plane, phone in my lap, staring at 43 unheard voicemails, suddenly desperate to hear every single one of them, terrified I'd run out of time before I could. I didn't listen to them on that flight. I told myself I'd listen once I knew he was okay, once this crisis passed, and I could listen to them properly, without the suffocating panic clouding every word. I've regretted that decision every single day since. He was gone by the time I landed. A massive heart attack, the doctors explained gently, likely fatal before he even hit the ground in that driveway. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to apologize for 2 years of delayed calls and half-hearted excuses. I never got to hear whatever was in those 43 voicemails while he was still alive, to know I'd finally listened. The days after his death exist in my memory as a kind of fog I still haven't fully emerged from, even now, 8 months later. I flew back to Chicago after the funeral with a single box of his belongings Mrs. Chen had carefully packed for me. Unable yet to face going through the house myself, unable to face selling it, unable to face much of anything beyond simply getting through each individual day. The box sat unopened in my apartment for nearly 2 months. I finally opened it on what would have been his 62nd birthday, alone on my apartment floor, surrounded by the small, careful details of an entire life reduced to a single cardboard box. Old photographs, his reading glasses, a worn leather wallet that still smelled faintly like him in a way that made me sob uncontrollably for almost an hour before I could continue. At the very bottom of that box, I found a small notebook I didn't recognize, filled entirely with his handwriting, dated entries spanning the last 2 years of his life. I opened it with trembling hands, uncertain what I was about to discover. It was a journal, apparently something he'd started keeping after noticing our calls becoming less frequent. Not an angry journal, not one filled with resentment about my absence. Instead, page after page of small updates he'd apparently wanted to remember to tell me eventually, things he'd meant to share during calls I never returned. Naomi got a promotion this month, I think. Saw it on her social media before I remembered she doesn't usually tell me things directly anymore. Proud of her anyway. Planted tomatoes again this spring. Same spot her mother and I used to plant them together before she left. Naomi used to help me water them when she was small. Wonder if she remembers that. Entry after entry, small, patient observations about a daughter slowly drifting away, written with a tenderness that somehow contained no bitterness at all, only continued, unwavering love, documented quietly in a notebook I never knew existed until it was far too late to respond to any of it. The final entry, dated 3 days before he died, read simply, "Called Naomi again today. Left a message. I think she's just busy building her life, the way young people are supposed to. I'm proud of her regardless. I hope she knows that, even in the silences. Some love doesn't need constant conversation to remain completely real." I sat on that floor for hours after reading his final entry, grief colliding with a guilt so overwhelming I genuinely didn't know how to continue breathing normally through it. He'd spent 2 years quietly documenting love I was too distracted to fully receive in real time, patiently waiting for calls I kept postponing, never once making me feel guilty for a silence that, according to his own words, he'd simply accepted as an unavoidable part of watching your child grow into her own separate life. I still haven't listened to those 43 voicemails. I know, logically, that I probably should, that there's likely nothing but continued warmth and patience waiting in each one, more evidence of a love that apparently never wavered despite years of delayed callbacks and distracted excuses. But some part of me isn't ready yet to hear his voice again, isn't ready to fully absorb how much I was quietly loved during the exact years I was too busy to notice it clearly. I moved back to my hometown 4 months ago. I couldn't fully explain the decision to anyone who asked, beyond simply saying I needed to be closer to what remained of him. I bought his house from the estate, kept his reading glasses on the same table where he always left them, replanted his tomato garden in the same spot he mentioned in that final journal entry, the same spot where, apparently, I used to help him water them as a small child I have almost no memory of being. I answer every single phone call now, no matter how busy I claim to be, no matter how inconvenient the timing. It's a small, probably insufficient way of trying to make amends with someone who can no longer receive them, but it's the only meaningful thing I know how to do with grief, this large and this permanent. If you still have someone in your life who calls you every week, who leaves patient voicemails you keep meaning to return eventually, please don't wait the way I did. Some silences feel harmless in the moment and become unbearable the instant they become permanent. I'd give anything to have 30 more ordinary Sunday phone calls with my father, and I will spend the rest of my life understanding, painfully, that I once had all of them available to me and simply didn't realize it until every single one was already gone.